So you booked your flight to New York and you're wondering, where on earth am I gonna stay? Well, don't fret. This is Kariman from Hijabi Globetrotter, and I'm gonna share with you the best practices when it comes to finding an accommodation in New York. When looking for an accommodation in New York, there are several factors to consider. Things like your budget, your lifestyle, your interest, your tolerance to crowds, and many other things. For example, I personally cannot handle crowd, so I look for places that are quiet, but yet also centrally located. New York, as you already know, is a very expensive city. Keep your expectations in check when coming to New York. I'm sure you already know this. Things to note: Manhattan section will most likely be the most expensive area, especially when you're around the tourist or center of the city. So yeah, I'm just gonna get right into it. And I know when people come to New York, they're always thinking of Manhattan because, that's where most of the tourist spots are. That's where most of the tourist spots are advertised. So I'm gonna start with Manhattan because I know a lot of you definitely consider Manhattan first when looking for accommodation. Let me break it down to you. Different accommodation options for different lifestyle, and so something to keep in mind when looking for an accommodation in New York. So the first place I'm going to start with is Central Park. Central Park is great for nature lovers, people that love opulence and luxury. A lot of movies are shot in Central Park, so people like to replicate that lifestyle, I guess. And so locations in Central Park could include Upper West Side, Upper East Side. These are usually the most expensive parts of Manhattan. Recommendations of hotels that you can check out there are La Quinta, One Hotel Central Park, and Whitby. That is the most luxurious and expensive hotel in Manhattan. You can also stay in Times Square area, and Times Square is great for commercial purposes. If you're into fashion, because they have the fashion district. If you're into bright lights, super touristy stuff, things that you see on television, Times Square is your spot. It's also great for people that are like partying, if that's your scene. One good thing about Times Square area is that a lot of Broadway shows are there because Broadway is in Times Square. So definitely, if those are your interests and those are things that you like, then consider a place in Times Square. And I will say that Times Square is centrally located, so it's the best spot to be, to meet people and to get from whatever point you want in New York City. But keep in mind that Times Square is probably the most crowded area of New York, and a lot of New York locals don't hang out there. So if you're going to New York just for tourist reasons, then Times Square is your spot. But if you want to connect with local and see how the day-to-day life of New Yorkers are, definitely not Times Square. It's super touristy. Most of the people there are either vendors trying to sell you stuff or non-New Yorkers. So locations around Times Square will be the Garment District, Midtown West, and the Diamond District. Hotels to consider in Times Square will be Brew Plaza, AC Hotel, and Hotel Sherman. Another part of Manhattan that you can check out is Soho. Very popular name, of course. Soho is known for its fashion and shopping. So if you're into shopping, Soho is your place to be. Locations in Soho's will be considered Little Italy and Nolita. Hotels to consider in Soho will be Citizen M, Bowery, The Broom, and the Christie Street Hotel. And finally, section of Manhattan that you should check out is Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan is known for its finance bros and finance gals. A lot of touristy attractions are there, like Wall Street, the World Trade Center, 9/11 Memorial, and many more. Of course, you can also check the Statue of Liberty, where you can see Statue of Liberty from there. My favorite part of Lower Manhattan actually is being able to walk from Manhattan to Brooklyn by the way of the Brooklyn Bridge. Other than that, it's another touristy spot in New York. So if you're a first-time visitor to New York, then you can also check out Lower Manhattan. Locations that we consider Lower Manhattan will be Tribeca, Financial District, and Lower East Side. So hotels to consider in Lower Manhattan would be Artisan Hotels, the Lulau Hotel, and the Beekman. Okay, so now we're done talking about Manhattan. I want to talk about other boroughs beyond Manhattan. I personally recommend visiting or staying in other boroughs that is not Manhattan, just because you get to see a different side of New York that is not usually, most part of New York is advertised, but that is not super commercialized. That's the best way to put it. And you get to really connect with locals. Personally, when I travel, I like to connect with the local people. So if you want to do that, I suggest staying beyond Manhattan. You can of course visit touristy parts, but if you want to see how locals live in New York, I would suggest going to Queens, going to Brooklyn, and so on. And many of the times these options are actually cheaper than staying in Manhattan. First time I visited New York, I discovered the neighborhood of Astoria, and I was so impressed, to be honest, because I thought that most of New York was like loud and crowded and hustle and bustle, but it was just so pleasant to be in a quiet area. I like quiet area, and I just fell in love with that neighborhood. And I found it through Airbnb actually, because New York is obviously expensive, and all the Airbnbs in Manhattan were super expensive, which we're going to go into very soon. The average cost of Airbnbs in certain boroughs. But Astoria had the best price, and it was just like, it was a way of discovering a new gem, and I opened my mind to trying something new. So I suggest that you open your mind as well to try other boroughs. And Queens is one of the largest boroughs, and probably the largest borough in New York City. So you don't have to go deep in Queens like Flushing. If you want to stay in Queens but also be close enough to the center and check out tourist attractions, you can stay in places like Long Island City, Astoria, Ditmer Steinway, Hunters Point. So these places are great spots to stay in Queens that is not far away from those tourist attractions. In Brooklyn, you can stay in places like Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, so that would be like Brooklyn Heights, Cobblestone area, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, New Yorkers, and Greenpoint. Another option, which is not necessarily New York, but people also do this, is to stay in New Jersey. New Jersey is also very close to New York City, so if you stay in places like Weehawken or West New York or Jersey City, Hoboken as well, those places also have great price options that are not in Manhattan Center but close enough to those tourist attractions that you may want to see. There are many options to consider when thinking of accommodation in New York. There's hotels, there's Booking.com, which is connected to hotels. So Booking.com is a really good website to check out great price options. I think I've seen hotels for even as low as $50. That's because sometimes Booking.com has like great promotions that you should definitely check out for. Something to keep in mind on Booking.com is also the additional fees for these hotels. So sometimes you might see a hotel that is super low, and you're like, this is so good to be true. Definitely check out for those additional prices and also taxes that are included in the hotel prices when booking an accommodation through Booking.com. There's also ways that you can stay in New York, which is through Airbnb, which is a route I usually take because it's just more, I don't know, I just like connecting with locals, and Airbnb does that for me. And most of the time, to be honest, the price is cheaper, but not necessarily all the time, but most of the time. So just to give you an idea, prices look like with Airbnb, we're going to start with Manhattan. If you are considering getting an Airbnb Manhattan for a private room, prices usually start around $70 a night. For an entire place, it could be $200 per night, and for a hotel, it could be starting at $120 per night in Manhattan. So just something to keep in mind. Of course, these prices vary by season. So it's known in New York that winter season is usually the low season for travel, or it's off-peak season. So we're talking January and February, so those are really cold months and not a lot of people visit New York during that time. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm talking, these prices are reflecting these low off-peak seasons, so they can vary, of course. But in general, this is the price point. If you're looking at Queens for Airbnb, expect prices for a private room to start around $40 per night. That's probably why I picked Queens when I first visited New York City. The entire place will start around $80 per night. A hotel room via Airbnb will start at $100 per night. In Brooklyn, a private room for an Airbnb could start around $53 per night. For an entire place with Airbnb in Brooklyn could start at $130 per night, and a hotel could start around $182 per night in Brooklyn. Okay, to wrap this video up, I'm just gonna give you some final tips for accommodation. One, come during off-peak season. You're gonna have less crowd. I mean, personally, I prefer that, but maybe if you don't, then don't listen to me. Less crowd, so winter season, January and February, of course, it's super cold, so of course you need to know if you're tolerant to cold or not. In general, if someone asks me when is the best time to visit New York, I'll say all year round. There's always something to do. There are tons of activity every day, so there is nothing like when is the best time to come to New York. So it also depends on you. If you hate the cold, then don't come in winter. If you prefer the heat, then come in summer, vice versa, and all of that. But I recommend coming off-peak season just because things are less expensive and hotels are more affordable, or accommodation is more affordable. When you're booking a place, definitely book closer to the public transportation. It's just easier. If it's so far, it will feel like you're walking miles and miles to get to your destination. So consider that either close to a bus stop or close to a subway. Speaking of transportation, when coming to New York, don't think that, oh, I don't think I'm gonna get on the train or the bus that often, so I'm gonna buy only one single pass. Don't do that. That was me when I first came to New York. So definitely get the 1 week pass. Unfortunately, there's no 1 day pass in New York for the metro. So yeah, the lowest you can do for an unlimited ride will be 1 week pass. And why I suggest doing the 1 week pass is because it's unlimited, one, and although you're like, oh my gosh, I'm paying $35, it really is worth it, because when I first came and I was like, I don't want to pay $35, I was paying that single pass, which is like $2.50 per ride. And the problem with that is that if you missed your train, or you got on the wrong direction, or you're confused, you're kind of like losing money every time you're swiping the on the turnstile. So with the unlimited pass, even if you make a mistake or you missed your way or unbite or whatever, you don't have to worry about you losing money, like, oh, you're saving pennies. You just kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna go on the next stop or station without like getting anxious or something. So definitely get the 1 week pass, especially if you know you're gonna get on public transportation often. But those are my tips for accommodation in New York. Let me know if you have any more tips or even any more questions. Hopefully they were useful to you. Thank you for watching my video. If you like this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for more tips on living in New York or visiting New York. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Ciao. Hasta luego.